Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us. I got some good news today. We're going to welcome back a guest we haven't had on the show in quite some time. Our buddy Mike Johnson's back on today, and I'm really excited about having Mike back on the program. He's got some great insight on what it's really like in spring practice. You know, we get to see a little bit of this. Georgia releases some videos of some of the other kind of stuff, but when the cameras aren't on and the watchful eye of the media has gone away, what is the grind on the inside really like? Mike's got some good insight on that. Plus, he'll tell us his thoughts on Georgia this upcoming season. We'll hear from Kirby Smart on today's show. Anthony, the so-called Ant-Man Edwards, the great Georgia basketball prospect, had some really interesting things to say last night about UGA basketball. We'll do that before we're done today. And a bunch of recruiting, including, listen, I love the recruiting soap opera. We got a fun recruiting soap opera to start today's show with. It involves five-star names. We like that around here, so it should be a good time. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is one thing that almost all of you that watch or listen regularly know about me is obviously I am a partisan. I want to see Georgia get as many elite recruits as it can. I want to see this roster grow and become as deep and talented as it possibly can be, or to really become, you know, the behemoth of the SEC and beyond. If you watch or listen regularly, you kind of already know that about me. I wear the red and black colors almost every single day. One thing you may not be quite so aware of is when it comes to following recruiting, I am almost as entertained by the soap opera as I am rooting for really good players to sign at Georgia. Apart from just having an interest in hopefully Georgia gets all the good players. Apart from that, I'm entertained by the recruiting process just because of the process. I love the soap opera and all of this. So we got some recruiting soap opera stuff to start off with on today's program, and we're mostly going to treat this as fun because I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know what any of this means, and it may not add up to end up being good news for Georgia, but there is kind of an interesting narrative thread emerging that I think is kind of neat. Let me start with this. Five-star offensive lineman Paris Johnson from Cincinnati, an Ohio State commit, and a guy that's been committed to Ohio State for a long time, recently took a tour of some of the Southern powers. I want to say he was at Alabama. I've seen a picture from him in there. He was at LSU. I've seen pictures from him there. And on March 17th, he was also at Georgia as well. We know that because Paris Johnson tweeted this. For those of you watching on video, you'll see that. I think we've actually talked about this before on the program. He's got the Georgia uniform on there. He was taking a visit to UGA. Now, for the most part, the Ohio State folks, I don't think made too big of a deal about this because, you know, you go on a tour, you see a bunch of stuff. I mean, yeah, I guess if you're a Buckeyes fan, you don't love the idea of a committed player visiting elsewhere. But listen, Ohio State's a lot like Georgia in the fact that they swim in deep recruiting waters. They're used to contested recruitments. They're used to trying to hold on commits from other programs, trying to pry them away. And Ohio State, under Urban Meyer for a long time, and presumably now under Ryan Day, is going to do the same kind of stuff. They're trying to pry away other programs' committed recruits. So Ohio State's used to all of this. Where the Paris Johnson story maybe gets a little bit different, though, is a report from DawgNation yesterday. Mike Griffith was the writer on this, that apparently the first kind of barnstorming tour of the South was not the only connection that Johnson's recently had with UGA. Let me show you Mike Griffith here on DawgNation.com, who says that Paris Johnson Jr., the number one ranked offensive tackle in the nation in the 2020 class, was on the Georgia football campus with his mother and sister for an unofficial visit on Tuesday. That's again. Mike writes, it's Johnson's second unofficial visit to Georgia this month. And you know Jeff Sintel's going to have some really interesting stuff coming up on this topic and more at DawgNation.com. But all of a sudden now, your ears, if you're an Ohio State fan, starts to perk up. And maybe if you're a Georgia fan, your ears start to perk up a little bit too. It's one thing to take a barnstorm visit with a bunch of high school teammates. It's another thing to say, you know what, let me go back and see what Georgia's bringing to the table here, and let me take some of my family for that. That's the kind of thing that around the Ohio State world you're going to get some kind of interesting reaction to. So much so that a lot of Buckeyes fans took to social media to try to remind Paris Johnson what he said in the past. In fact, there was one kind of Buckeye recruiting Instagram feed, basically a feed that covers Buckeye recruiting, or a feed that a lot of Ohio State Buckeyes fans choose to follow, and they took a screen grab of a previous tweet from Paris Johnson a long time ago as a reminder of what he said in the past. If you're watching on video, I'll show you this again, too. It's an old tweet from Paris Johnson from last summer that says, and this is Johnson's own words, "When I commit, I'm committed. no decommitting or flipping. And the account Buckeye.recruit says to Ohio State fans, hey, y'all don't worry about when he said it, just don't forget those words, basically trying to calm Ohio State fans down. They were going to lose this elite offensive lineman that Paris Johnson might leave the Ohio State program. Now, it's not a given that if Johnson were to leave Ohio State, he would indeed come to Georgia. He's visited a lot of schools as of late, but obviously some of this kind of is connected to Georgia because of the DawgNation report about the second Paris Johnson visit. But here is where things get really interesting, and now another five-star recruit comes into the fold because a response to that particular Instagram post was from five-star running back Kendall Milton. Now, since this was up, it may have been deleted because we looked for this again this morning and couldn't find it. Doesn't mean it wasn't there. I just couldn't personally find it. However, we did get a screen grab of this from very early this morning. Here is Milton on this, the response. He says, and he tags Paris Johnson in this, saying, "So you ain't told them yet?" That's Kendall Milton to Paris Johnson on the subject of his current Ohio State commitment. Now, listen, I cannot pretend to tell you what any of this means. Y'all know I'm like 1,000 years old. I don't always speak social media really well when it comes to a lot of this stuff anyway, especially Instagram. Twitter I'm probably a little bit better with. Instagram not always great. So I cannot tell you that when Kendall Milton says to Paris Johnson, "You haven't told them yet," I can't promise you that means that Milton is saying to Johnson, you haven't told them yet you're decommitting from Ohio State. And as much as I'd like for this to be the case, I can't promise you that Milton, when he says that to Johnson about what we could assume might be a decommit, I can't promise you that also means that Johnson would then decommit from Ohio State only to land at Georgia. Obviously, there's some smoke there with a couple of recent visits, but we can't promise what any of that would mean because we don't necessarily know what's inside the head of five-star running back Kendall Milton. But we can assume and we can speculate. And here's where things also get a little bit interesting, too, because there's no doubt been some chatter about Milton with a lot of different schools as of late. You hear, Oklahoma pop up from time to time. You hear Ohio State even pop up from time to time. But there is that potential of the Georgia interest for Milton, too. Of course, there's one big issue, one big hurdle that's got to be leapt over, and we'll get to that before we're done here, of course. But could Milton, when he talks to Paris Johnson, be saying good things about the University of Georgia? Well, the most optimistic, hopeful appraisal of a Georgia fan is, yeah, maybe he could, based on some circumstantial evidence from Milton in the past. In fact, just within the last few days, Justin Robinson doing yeoman's work on Twitter, the recent UGA commit, and I think a really good-looking wide receiver prospect from Eagles Landing Christian Academy. This is a guy that a number of people, Jeff Sintel, Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver, you've heard the comparisons between Robinson and Calvin Johnson a lot. Now, I know that may seem like too much praise too soon. As Terrence Edwards explained to us on a broadcast earlier this week, that when he makes that comparison, he's not talking about Detroit Lions Calvin Johnson. He's talking about Sandy Creek High School Calvin Johnson, of what Johnson looked near the end of his high school career, which I think is an interesting topic from Edwards when it comes to Robinson. But nonetheless, Robinson was out there this week pitching Kendall Milton on the idea of coming to Georgia. And Kendall Milton had a response. Milton responding back to Robinson. Robinson says, "Bro, let's be on the same team. Let's make history." And Kendall Milton says, "We could really make that happen." Gives you a dog emoji and a hashtag #GoDogs. Now, recruits say this kind of stuff on Twitter all the time, and it doesn't end up producing the fruit that fans want. Georgia fans can think of a lot of examples where guys have touted UGA on social media only not to end up being in the class. But as far as a good news, bad news situation, it's certainly more good than bad when Kendall Milton's talking about GoDogs on Twitter, especially when you pair that with some of his comments in the past, a guy that clearly seems to have some things he likes about UGA. In fact, one of the things, even though he hasn't yet taken that Georgia visit, which is a big hurdle you got to get over here, one of the things that we do know is he likes Georgia coach Kirby Smart. In fact, here's what he told Jeff Sintel about the UGA coach. Here is Kendall Milton.
Just seeing his history, seeing his past, he seems like a great guy. It seems like with his coaching record, it seems like he knows what he's doing. He has a strong reputation for winning, getting his team to those big games, and everybody wants to be able to get to the national championship, and I feel like he's a coach that can bring his team to that, so that's a big thing.
So that's good stuff from Kendall Milton talking about Kirby Smart. He likes his reputation for winning. But we know when it comes to these five-star running backs, the real influential name oftentimes is Georgia running backs coach Dale McGee. Well, guess what? Milton, who is in regular contact with McGee, likes him a lot too.
talking to Coach McGee, it doesn't feel like you're just talking to a coach. It feels like you're talking to a friend or somebody that you can actually open up to, talk to. He has kind of a housewarming feel when you talk to him. So that's one thing that separates him from, all the other coaches.
So you like Kirby Smart, you like Dell McGee. I guess that must mean, Kendall Milton, you must like Georgia pretty well then. They must be one of the schools that you're strongly considering given your relationship with these two coaches. And Kendall Milton has told DawgNation and Jeff Sintel in the past, yeah, that's kind of true.
I think Georgia has a major shot in being able to get me to go to their program. I love the whole school. I love Coach Smart. I love Coach McGee. I love Coach Williams. They're all great people, great guys, great coaches. And, I can see myself playing at the next level. They produce lots of running backs for the NFL, like they produced 2 last year. And it'd be great to be able to pick up where they left off and be able to get something going.
So, quick recap here. 5-star offensive lineman Paris Johnson visits Georgia, swings back around with his family to visit Georgia again. Kendall Milton, the 5-star running back, jokes on Instagram that Johnson's about to leave Ohio State's class, the school that he's been committed to for a long time. Some Georgia fans wonder, could that be good news for UGA, and could that also give us a little bit of a hint or insight into Kendall Milton's own recruitment? You just heard a lot of circumstantial evidence that would certainly suggest that Milton feels pretty favorably about the Dogs, but the big but in this entire conversation is you got to get Kendall Milton on campus to really feel good about Georgia's chances of getting in on him and maybe allowing Milton to be also a heavy influence on a guy like Paris Johnson if he were to indeed decide that he no longer wants to be a part of Ohio State's class. Well, that's where DawgNation's Jeff Sintel comes in. I know you read this report, but let me give you a reminder of it within the context of everything that we've just said, because the problem of Milton having not visited Georgia, apparently that's about to be cleaned up, because Kendall Milton's father, Chris, will show you the quote here on DawgNation Daily, says, between now and May, we will be getting unofficials out of the way, and Georgia is absolutely one of the schools he wants to visit, meaning Kendall Milton. So now it's just a matter of my schedule and my wife's schedule here and Kendall's school schedule with that. So before the end of this year, Milton does apparently plan to get on the UGA campus, and at that point in time, we assume the Georgia campus will do what it does, which is sell itself quite well. So let me kind of wrap all of this up. I don't know what any of this means, and there's obviously a really good chance that Georgia doesn't get Paris Johnson. He stays with Ohio State, and Kendall Milton chooses one of the other schools that he's thought to be choosing between. But as it goes in March, this is actually kind of fun, right? To have Paris Johnson, multiple visits to UGA, Kendall Milton, a lot of chatter from him about Georgia as of late, and it certainly seems like this 2020 class for Georgia is picking up some momentum at very much the right time. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find those podcasts. It's just great to have you on the program today. We are loaded and busy on the program. We'll do a little recruiting stuff here, and later on we'll hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart, an update on spring practice. We'll talk to our old friend Mike Johnson, the longtime SEC All-American and great analyst covering the league. We'll have some fun with Mike coming up on the program here today as well. And at the very end of the show, I want you to make sure you hear what Anthony Edwards, the McDonald's All-American, 5-star signee, or about to be signee, he's a Georgia commit right now, what he had to say about Georgia basketball last night after the McDonald's All-American game with our buddy Mike Griffith. This is good stuff for those of you who have a hope that Georgia basketball can take a big step forward. Anthony Edwards is going to give you some reasons to believe that, and that's coming up on our program here today. Before we get to any of that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by Online Trading Academy. And I want to keep the recruiting talk going with something that you may have missed from Before the Hedges yesterday, presented by Kroger. Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, Michael Carvel, our DawgNation recruiting/video team. Great effort this past Sunday at the Atlanta opening regional qualifier, where some of the top prospects in not just the state or the Southeast, but the entire country, were on hand trying to punch their ticket for the big recruiting event of the summer, the opening, which now takes place in Frisco, Texas. DawgNation's been able to talk to a lot of those guys, and I wanted to give you just a couple quick highlights from what I thought were some of the really important parts of the conversation, in the hopes that you'll then go find on the DawgNation video channels or the Before the Hedges podcast page and dive in and take on the entire show here this week, an update on UGA recruiting. Let me start out with Miles Murphy, the 5-star defensive end, whom we have discussed this week already here on DawgNation Daily. What seems to be right now, in my mind, somewhat lukewarm interest in UGA. Let me let you hear kind of a compilation of a couple of different lines from Murphy and see if you come away with the same way that I am, that Sounds like Georgia's got some work to do when it comes to this big-time in-state prospect. Here is Miles Murphy.
Two hats that I know will be there.
Right.
It'll be probably Auburn, Clemson, but those aren't the only. Those are the only two that I know that are going to be up there.
What does Georgia need to do to keep pace with those guys?
Oh, well, they are keeping pace. I'm just. It's on me when it comes to that. So I just have to keep looking for what I want to see, and if I don't see it, I just have to cross it off the list.
So that's two different parts of the interview. I just put them together for time's sake. At the beginning part of that, Murphy says the two hats that I know are going to be there are Clemson and Auburn. And then later on in the discussion, Jeff Sentell, because he covers UGA recruiting, brings up Georgia. What does Georgia have to do? And Murphy says, oh, Georgia's right there. They're keeping pace. But when he had a chance to answer this without having a team suggested to him, Clemson and Auburn were the two that he mentions right away, with also saying, but there will be other hats there. So read into that what you will. I certainly take from that Georgia's got some work to do when it comes to Murphy, and that's work that I hope the Dogs can get done, because I think that Murphy would potentially be a really important part of this class for both symbolic and tangible reasons. You want to hit big with in-state guys, and frankly, you don't want to lose big-time prospects, and Murphy, I think, is good in a lot of regards when it comes to that. There was also something interesting that another five-star prospect said on Sunday. That was Arik Gilbert. Full interview as a part of Before the Hedges, but one of the things that Gilbert told Jeff Sentell is when he's talking to UGA tight ends coach Todd Hartley, there is a specific topic that seems to come up a lot, and I think this from Gilbert's kind of interesting. Here's the five-star tight end, Arik Gilbert.
Coach Hartley, he really likes me, and I really like him. Obviously, his history, he brings that up a lot with David Njoku, his guys in Miami. So, yeah, that's basically what we talk about. We talk a lot now. I went down there for a visit, and we got to talk, so that was good. We just talked about how he was trying to change Georgia's offense around with the tight ends. Or not change it around, but just add tight ends into it.
So for those of you who've assumed that one of the things that Arik Gilbert's looking to see from Georgia, will tight ends be more of a part of the offense with Hartley now as tight ends coach and James Coley now as offensive coordinator? That is indeed the case. This is a guy who wants to catch touchdowns, and he wants to make sure he's a part of an offense where tight ends are going to be used. That's one more reason to be very interested in the tight end conversation with Georgia this season. Let me squeeze in one more here, this time from UJ commit. Jamil Burroughs, you may have seen recently that he was at LSU. He talked also as a part of Before the Hedges yesterday about his interest in the Tigers. Here is the defensive line UGA commit.
Only school I've really been to is LSU lately. So LSU, it was a good visit, but, it comes around, the Dogs always on top. It's just something about Georgia that I really love. And, compared to LSU to Georgia, Georgia, they more real than LSU.
Would LSU be the closest contender here to Georgia?
Yeah, they're top two, sure.
If there's anybody that could flip you, would it be LSU?
Yeah, most definitely. To be real.
I like that clip from Burroughs because it sums up his feelings. I don't think he's changed his love for Georgia at all, but you got to also be aware of what's out there. And for him, the other school that appears to be out there right now is LSU. So good recruiting update. Make sure you check out Before the Hedges for more. And a huge thanks to Online Trading Academy for presenting Around the Doghouse here today. Online Trading Academy is one of the best decisions you'll ever make because it's the decision to invest in yourself. Simply check out tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's trading with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. Learn how to make money in the markets. All kinds of asset classes, all kinds of trading styles, basically a way to be nimble and quick in the markets and really find out a way to make some great money in investing. Tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. Huge thanks to Online Trading Academy for bringing Around the Doghouse to us here today. We'll hear from Kirby Smart later on. For now, though, on what it's really like to be on the field during an SEC spring practice and what to expect from the Bulldogs this year, let's talk to our buddy Mike Johnson right now. Boy, it has been a long time, and it's good to have him back. Our good friend, long time and forever friend, Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American and a terrific analyst covering the SEC. And, Mike, I got to tell you, it is great to have you back on the program today. We really appreciate your time, and we hope you're doing well.
It's always a pleasure, my friend, coming back on to talk about anything SEC with you, my friend. Hope you're doing well.
So I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about this because obviously we, sometimes keep our private lives private. But can we talk about what happened this past weekend? Is that something you're comfortable discussing?
Absolutely, man. It was a pleasure to see you.
So I was lucky enough, my wife and I, to be a part of Mike's wedding this past weekend in Atlanta. I got to tell you, it was one of the most beautiful, and I mean this. This is not just me being, nice. I mean this with all sincerity. We've talked about that since then. Gene and I have that. It was one of the most beautiful ceremonies we've been a part of. Great group of friends. So much fun, just the epitome of class from the word go. Mike, thanks for allowing us to be a part of that. And I tell you, it was a great time. First of all, when you're like me and you got 2 young kids, any sort of night on the town away from kids is kind of a nice deal for us. But just in general, it was a great time. Congratulations to you, and just a really special time for us to be a part of that with you.
Yeah, man, listen, we appreciate you coming. We were flattered that you and Gina were able to make it. And, listen, man, we're still pinching ourselves. You're right. It really was a perfect day, weather-wise, ceremony, reception, the whole bit, man. It was good to get you there and good to get a lot of people there. And you're right. There was a lot of Bama stuff going on, so it was nice to sprinkle in a little bit of the Georgia Bulldogs for sure.
Well, I will say this real quickly, and we'll get on to the subject of football. So I tried to be kind of somewhat neutral in the way that I dressed, a lot of black. But I made sure to wear, like, the brightest red socks possible because there's too much crimson in that room as it was. So I wanted to make sure I counterbalanced that with, like, the brightest possible red that I could. But I at least kept it confined to my ankles. That way I'm not too obnoxious.
No, I appreciate it. I was concerned that somebody would approach you. I think it was it went off well, though, man. It was really, man, it was a pleasure having you in the building. And like I said, we're still pinching ourselves. We're a very happy couple.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And obviously this time of year, we think about, the guys like you who've gone through this stuff before. I get to see a little bit of spring practice. I was lucky enough to be in Athens on Tuesday, saw some of that. Georgia releases some video of the parts that maybe we don't always get to see, but very few of us know what it really feels like. And so I was hoping as part of our conversation today, you could kind of tell us a little bit about this. You went through a lot of these at Alabama and I think you'd be the first to say, on some good teams and maybe some not quite so good teams, but you know what the rigors of the SEC level are like this time of year. So is this something that the players look forward to? I mean, I'll contrast this with NFL training camp in the late summer, where I think most of the NFL guys, the veterans, don't like NFL training camp at all. How is spring practice at the college level? Similar to that? Different from that? What does it really feel like to be a part of this?
Well, first and foremost, it's a very unique experience. I mean, the weather's not quite as brutal as you're going to find in the South and some of the fall camps. When you get to August, when you get to, late July and some of these teams start reporting, you don't really have that so much when you start in March. The temperatures are a little bit better. And honestly, I think mentally that allows you to kind of focus more on your craft. You're not worried about how hot it is, and you're not worried about, how dehydrated you are and how much you're cramping. You're worried about your craft, and you're worried about getting better. And you and I have talked about this a number of times, BA. A lot of people think that, your biggest strides in football come when you're on the football field. I'd say the biggest strides come mentally in this break between the season, between spring practice. You've gone all the way through the season. You've made it. You've gotten past the bowl games. Your season was what it was. And then for the next 2-3 months, you kind of sit there and think about what you did wrong or what you did right. You think about the film, and you think about technique, and you think about the scheme. And then when you get to spring practice, then all of a sudden you can hit the ground running. And like I said, the weather's not as bad. You can kind of focus on things. So I always enjoyed spring practice. I always thought it was a time to make huge strides, to really make some of the fine-tuned technique things, and to really understand what your place is going to be in the fall when the season does come around, especially for leadership. The leadership is huge in spring. They're just now finding their footing to understand what their role will be, who's going to speak up, who's going to take the bull by the horn. So a huge, huge opportunity for so many people, and it's not quite as grinding as it is when you get to that fall camp.
So a word that Kirby uses all the time, and your old coach Nick Saban used this word too, competition. Spring practice is about competition. It's competing for playing time with your own position group, but it's also competing for dominance with the guy on the other side of the ball, offense versus defense, things like that. Georgia, like your old program, does ones-on-one a lot during this kind of stuff. But here's the thing that we know about real competition that the players and coaches probably aren't able to admit. That when you're really competing, it's very easy to develop a level of animosity for the person on the other side. So I was hoping you might describe that a little bit, whether it be trying to do drills faster, better, more complete than other offensive linemen, or trying to knock a defensive lineman in the dirt to make sure that you hold on to your starting spot. This is a high-stakes game because the guys that earn the playing time get the attention of the NFL scouts and eventually the ones that may make some money. If you're on the outside, looking in on that, you've either got to go find a different place to play or find a different line of work once you're out of college. So I'm not asking to necessarily stir up trouble here, but give us an idea of away from the coach speak and away from the, hey, kumbaya, we all love each other, we're all a family, what does the competition really feel like when the spoils for the victor are so great and the disappointment for the loser, at least in terms of playing time, can potentially be devastating?
Yeah, I'm a pretty mild-mannered person. I'm not a guy that likes to stir up a ton of trouble, but I got to tell you, if there was 15 spring practices before my senior year, I bet I got in 10 fights. I mean, I bet I got in 10 fisticuffs leading out through that spring practice because that's exactly right. I mean, it is a competition in every sense of the word, not just for your position, but ones versus ones. There was, in 2009, when I was a senior, there's not a member of our defense that did not get drafted in the NFL. The Terrence Cody's, the Marcel Dariuses, Rolando McClain's, Dante Hightowers, Mark Barron's, Kareem Jackson, a lot of those guys still playing. And, it's 10 years later. So we had a ton on the line in terms of just bragging rights. And you're right. You get knocked in the dirt, and you feel your pride on the line, or you'd knock somebody else in the dirt, and their pride was on the line. And it was time to go at it. And at the end of the day, you did, you hugged and you made up, but there was no secret that, you had to really stake your claim to that starting role, and you had to stake your claim to that dominance. So you're right. It's a kumbaya kind of thing, and everybody's happy at the end of the day, but boy, oh boy, there's a lot on the line. And like I said, you're not prepared for a game. You're not worried about, hey, this guy's got to be healthy on Saturday, and we've got to have him to put our best foot forward. It's, hey, you know what? This guy's coming for my job, or this guy's trying to make me look bad, and there's all these scouts and attendants and everything else going on. I've got to lay it out there. And so there is a lot on the line, and boy, oh boy, I'm telling you right now, I had some bruised knuckles at the end of some of those days.
That's a really interesting story to tell, Mike. I'm glad you told it. Let's kind of shift our attention now to what Georgia's going to look like on the field, because I will say, Mike, having been there and seen some of these practices, the feeling around the team is so different than it was a year ago, because last year it was about the curiosity of, what does Justin Fields look like? What's the competition between Fromm and Fields going to be like? And is there a chance that Georgia plays both these guys? Is there a chance that Fields overtakes Fromm? And you and I had this, conversation 9 million times over the course of the last year, so you know all about that. But now Fields isn't here anymore, and the feeling on the offense is totally different. Of now it's, we know this is Fromm's team, but how far can it go? We know there's still talent on defense, but is there a chance this defense is even more dynamic than it was a year ago? When you kind of watch the way that Georgia has evolved from last year to now, and kind of how it fits into the story with the rest of the SEC East, what do you see from the Bulldogs right now?
Well, I think obviously they're going to, be a run-heavy football team, and anytime you have an offensive line with the talent they have, and a guy like Jake Fromm and some of the backs that they'll have in the backfield, you get excited about the prospect of it. But I really am, just from the outside looking in, as a guy who's not as close to the program as you are and some of the listeners, I look at it and I look for Jake Fromm to really, really take that next step. Not that he was not very, very good, but sometimes, and like you said, you get caught up watching these programs. You start comparing Justin Fields to Jake Fromm and Jake Fromm to Justin Fields and back and forth and which guy is better and which guy does what. Now, all of a sudden, Jake Fromm has the opportunity to not really test himself or rate himself against somebody within the program. Now, all of a sudden, Jake Fromm has a chance to look around and say, hey, I need to be, a Bulldog great. I need to look at, what Aaron Murray was or what Matthew Stafford was. Not only that, look around the country and say, oh, you know what, this guy is doing that over in this team, and this guy is putting up these numbers elsewhere. Start comparing yourself against, the elite of the elite from around the league. And I think that's what's so exciting is you have not just Jake Fromm, but a number of guys like that in the starting lineup from Georgia. And I just look for that continuity from them. It was talked about a lot last offseason about replacing some of that leadership, and I think they did a pretty good job of doing that. But that will have to be something they continue to do, foster that leadership role, those leadership roles to be a part of this program. And Kirby Smart has the blueprint to do that. I know they've got some good guys within the program, but I think that they're probably working on that pass rush and getting a lot of those freshmen from the last couple of signing classes to where they can play and be a big part of this program.
Well, let me talk about Smart for a minute, and I'm going to set you up for what can be a little bit of a difficult question to answer. But when you look at coaches that have won the national championship, both recently and over the last couple decades, the guys that have won for the most part have won them quickly. I'm thinking about Jimbo Fisher's national championship at Florida State. I'm thinking about Urban Meyer's national championships at both Florida and Ohio State. Nick Saban a couple times at LSU and Alabama. For the most part, these guys that win them relatively quickly. Now, Dabo Swinney's a contrast to that, but even going back, more than a decade ago, when you get to Bob Stoops, Oklahoma, and guys like that, guys that win national championships have, for the most part, won them on their first 4 years in the job. Well, lo and behold, look what we got here. Kirby Smart going into year 4. You saw how fast a transformation can occur for a college program because Nick Saban wins a championship, what, in his 3rd year, 7, 8, 9? Yes, 3rd year at Alabama in 2009. So how much pressure is Kirby Smart facing to be like these other guys who found a way to get it done in the first 4 years? Because as much as Kirby Smart's doing some great things for Georgia, history would show if you don't win one early, it's hard to win one at all.
Yeah, and listen, I think that's definitely an off-season talking point. I think it will continue to be a talking point for some of the, I don't want to call them haters, but some of the doubters when it comes to Kirby Smart and his tenure at Georgia and some of the people that look at that program from the outside. But listen, I know Kirby, and I know how his mind works, and he gets his mind a lot of things from Nick Saban. And the fact of the matter is, he's not focused on what year it is at all. It could be year 10 or 11 for him, and Kirby's still doing a lot of the same things. And just to kind of, and not to anger any Georgia fans or anybody outside the program, but some of the critique I get for Kirby Smart is, well, he's just the SEC Jim Harbaugh, and I don't see that at all. I mean, Kirby Smart is a guy that knows how to win. He's been very, very close and has already won an SEC title. And you mentioned Bob Stoops. I would rather have, Bob Stoops' career in reverse than to have won a national championship in year number 1 or number 2, and then not have won one after that. So, I look at Kirby Smart. He knows the blueprint. He's focused on the day-to-day operation and being able to get those things done. I just think that he's the kind of guy that knows mentally where he needs to be and knows that it takes a long path to get there. So I don't think they're feeling any pressure. I think year 4 is a good year to get it done, and I'm sure that talk to any Georgia fans that, hey, listen, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. But I think we all know that Kirby Smart is headed to that winner's circle before too long.
I think it's a really interesting take on all that. Let me kind of go around the league for just a couple of minutes before we let you go here. Obviously, the 2 teams that played in Atlanta last December are going to be the favorites to get back there again, Alabama and Georgia. But when you look in the 2 divisions, do you see a real threat on either side? I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, even though Florida's going to be a preseason top 10 team, I'm not quite sure they're there yet. I do think there are a couple of interesting teams in the West. I think that Jimbo Fisher, what he's doing at Texas A&M, could be really intriguing this year. Mike, in the past, I haven't always been high on Ed Orgeron and LSU. I think this team this year maybe a little bit better on offense, still some dynamic players on defense, despite the fact that Greedy Williams and Devin White aren't going to be there anymore. I think this LSU team's probably pretty good. What do you think of those teams just below the 2 overwhelming favorites? Our team here, Georgia, and your alma mater, Alabama. What do you think about the rest of the league?
Well, I'm honestly looking at a couple of year 2 leaps when you talk about some of the head coaches from around the league, and I think that LSU's got a good shot of being a good team. I'm kind of to the point, BA, with LSU, and you and I have talked about LSU round and round for a number of years now, that I've got to see it out of LSU. And so many times I've just gone back to saying, oh, well, they're LSU, they can get it done. And they do. I mean, a lot of times they win a lot of games, and Ed Orgeron has gotten the extension now, and he's proven to be a good coach. But I'm going to have to see it from LSU. I'm going to have to see this offense make strides. That's where a lot of their talent lies now, is on the offensive side of the ball. So can they make the strides in that offense to be able to get it done? But going back to what I said, I see a couple of year 2 coaches that which one can make a stride. Can Jeremy Pruitt take a stride? Can Dan Mullen make strides? Can Jimbo Fisher make strides? And honestly, when I look at Texas A&M, they're, to me, the biggest threat when it comes to the SEC West. And it's not because so much of their talent base or what they've got going on. I just know Jimbo Fisher knows how to coach championship caliber football teams. I said it a ton leading into last season that I thought Texas A&M would be a lot better than people thought. I think they did end up being that way. Now can they take that extra stride? And the same goes for Florida. I thought Florida would be better than most people thought. I think they ended up being better than a lot of people thought, but they too had their hiccups along the way. So can any of these teams find the consistency? That's what it's going to take, and Georgia fans know this as well as I do. You have to find the consistency week in and week out. You can't have the lull mid-season. You can't get to mid-October or mid-November and say, "Oh, we're gonna cough this one up." I mean, ask Florida fans about the Kentucky game. Georgia obviously having the hiccup against LSU. You have to be able to find the consistency, and I don't know. My money is heavily on Alabama and Georgia getting back to that game, but if another team can sneak up and bite them, they've got to be able to find that consistency along the way.
Mike, it is so much fun to talk to you about the SEC here. We love getting your thoughts on Georgia and what it's really like to be a player on the field this time of year. And I know a lot of folks have already connected with you on social media from our audience, but many more folks would probably like to. Tell us how we can find you on Twitter and any other social media stuff you want to promote.
Yeah, at MP Johnson 79, and you know as well as I do, BA, always coming out with the announcements of where to hang out. Got a lot of stuff going on, but it was a pleasure to see you this past weekend, my friend, and hope everyone has a good day.
Yeah, let's catch up again soon, Mike. Great stuff.
Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think that's really interesting for Mike. I love that analysis as a player and as a former player. One of the things that Mike's also really good at doing is he's going to be very honest with you about, listen, there's a thing that a coach is going to say. There's the kind of the coach speak when it comes to all this kind of stuff. But there's also kind of the real stuff about what it's really like going on behind the scenes. And I think Mike's he does a really good job of that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate that from him, and really good stuff there. And then as far as the idea of the pressure that Kirby Smart's facing going into year 4, I'm going to make one quick point about this, then we'll move on with our SEC Through. When it comes to this, and what previous coaches have done, Meyer and Saban and Jimbo Fisher for his national championship, and kind of on you could go with the list of guys who did that. We are now in an era for Smart at Georgia that's just different than previous eras, where I think there was a little more balance in college football a few years ago. So therefore, if you were a national easy for me to say, championship level coach, well, you could rise up and take yours. Then in a couple of years, somebody would take that from you. The trophy got passed around seemingly a good bit more. Think about all the different SEC teams that won them in kind of like the first decade of the new millennium, stretching into the decade we're in now. We had a lot of different SEC teams win titles. Now, though, we've never had more talent, more capital seemingly resting with just a small number of programs. It's Alabama, it's Clemson. Even though we haven't seen them win the title since 2014, I'd probably still include Ohio State in that discussion. There's a small number of truly elite teams in college football. Therefore, for an up-and-coming coach like Kirby Smart, breaking through and winning that title when Clemson has Hall of Fame level quarterbacks, when Alabama has the stacked roster, it's just harder to do now than it was. That may come across as excuse-making for Kirby Smart. I don't mean for it to. I guess what I mean is, as much as I love bringing up the narrative of what national championship coaches have previously looked like, the track record and how quickly they've won those, we truly may be in a different era now, and the relatively different path that Dabo Swinney has followed to becoming one of the sports top coaches may be another example of that. All right, we'll hear from, speaking of Kirby Smart, we'll hear from him on his spring practice in just a moment in our Harrah's Cherokee Casino's spring practice update. We'll do that coming up in just a moment. Let me get a couple of SEC stories in before we get to there. I saw where Auburn is potentially dealing with another transfer situation. And my goodness, they've had a lot of these. Cameron Kelly, a four-star defensive back, early enrollee, 2019 signee, just basically arriving on campus, is now entering the transfer portal. Now, he put out a really nice message on social media. It looks like his family is dealing with a legitimate illness. Mom's sister, I think, was the illness being cited here. AL.com is reporting that. But another guy from Auburn going to the transfer situation. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm painting this unfairly. It seems like transfer is an issue now for everybody in college football, but for whatever reason, Auburn has had to deal with way more of this than anybody else. And I don't really know what you say about Kelly in this. Everybody's family situation is different, and different people have different levels of importance on different people in the family. But this is another example of this kind of family stuff kind of complicating what without knowing the backstory. And this may just look like a case of buyer's remorse. He's from the Virginia area. You've already seen some whispers among fans of, well, maybe he goes to UVA, maybe goes to Virginia Tech, maybe he gets involved with one of those programs. I honestly don't know what to make of all of this, but this is certainly a very interesting snapshot of what the current state of college football looks like. Speaking of Auburn, SI.com was highlighting these quarterback battles that may stretch beyond spring practice into the season. And I said before that when you have an opportunity to name a starting quarterback, I think that's a good thing to do. I think that's a smart thing to do. For instance, Missouri named Kelly Bryant its starting quarterback before spring practice really even began. I think there's a symbolic value to that when you know you've got a guy you want the rest of the team to rally around. I agree with Joe Neeson writing at Sports Illustrated that right now Auburn's not one of those programs. I've said before that what happens for Auburn at quarterback is going to be a crucial issue for Georgia, a lot of other SEC teams. I've also been of the belief that we may see kind of a first half of the season starter for the Tigers and a second half season starter for the Tigers. If this thing's ultimately not won by Bo Nix, the incoming freshman, then the ceiling for Auburn, how good it can be this year, I believe it gets a lot lower. Speaking of Missouri, I saw where they put out a tweet from their own official account. They're going to wear stickers in the back of their helmets this year that say, "Make it right." It's essentially a challenge to the NCAA to lessen the sanctions or completely remove them. As it stands right now, Missouri is appealing a postseason ban, other kind of stuff like that, based on a case in which they actually cooperated with the NCAA. We've had a lot of these recent harbingers of this is going to tell you a lot about how college football is going in the future. I think this is as well. There's a huge distaste right now for the NCAA. There's a lot of, this has always been true, but as it stands right now, there seems to be a little bit of growing dissatisfaction with how the NCAA, which is really just a representation of the full member institutions anyway, but nonetheless, how it chooses to govern what I would describe as selective enforcement of some rules against some programs. Missouri fighting back may be kind of a new chapter in all of that story. And then one more quick SEC through story to get to. First of all, I hope you'll check out Connor Riley's piece at DawgNation.com. He looked at the way that ESPN has examined how Georgia is a top game for a lot of its way too early top 25 teams this year. It's kind of a fun read from Connor. Something else that I noticed in that same piece from ESPN is the pressure potentially facing Florida against Miami. And it's not even a week 1 opener. We'll call it like a week 0 opener because it's the week before the rest of all the teams play. And I think pressure here is a very key word because Florida does have a lot of expectations for a team that right now still got some unanswered questions. Offensive line may be chief among those. I've heard a lot of chatter coming about that out of Gainesville as of late. You want to talk about a team against an in-state foe, a major recruiting rival. You want to talk about a team that's got a lot to prove in week 1. That Florida-Miami game is going to be really, really interesting. August 24th, I think, is the date for that. It's the week before the rest of the season. That's going to be a really, really interesting game, and it's not too early to start thinking about that. Even though I don't love the date in which it's being played, it's certainly an interesting game and interesting to think about. You can go to ESPN.com, read the rest of the story. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, there are a couple of things that I want to do here for a moment. I want to do our Harris Cherokee Casino spring practice update first. And, we've talked a lot about the various position battles going on at UGA. There's one in particular I want to highlight right now. Now, we heard Reed Gilbert say earlier, the 5-star tight end, that he's looking in on Georgia. He's heard from Todd Hartley. Georgia's going to use its tight ends more this season. As it stands right now, though, there's only one problem with Georgia using its tight ends this spring. According to Georgia coach Kirby Smart, there is one word that probably describes the current state of the tight end situation more so than anything else. Here's what Smart said about that this week.
Thin. There's not a lot of guys there. We moved Kobe White, who we thought was a really good outside backer in fall camp, and he did a good job. He's developed. He's gotten a little bigger. We moved him over there to give us a little more depth. He's done some really competitive things. He's fighting his tail off. There's a young man that decided to be a walk-on here, Peyton Mercer, who's done an incredible job competing over there. Several guys, but Charlie and John are ahead of the other guys. And obviously we got help on the way, and we want more help. But if you ask me how it is right now, it's thin.
So keep your eye on that thin tight end situation for UGA. I was watching that position group a little bit earlier this week in practice, and I got to tell you, I'm rooting for John Fitzpatrick, second-year guy in the program out of Marist, a pretty, I think, interesting-looking prospect because of how tall he is, how big he is. I'm rooting for him to use this opportunity to become that second tight end for UGA. Being there this spring is a big chance for him, and I hope Fitzpatrick gets an opportunity to make the most of it. It's our spring practice update here on DawgNation Daily, and it's brought to you by Harris Cherokee Casinos. And if it's time to get your other game on, Harris Cherokee Casinos gives you 2 great options. Harris Cherokee Valley River Casino and Hotel in Murphy, North Carolina. It's convenient to Atlanta. It's got 300 hotel rooms, slots, blackjacks, roulette, and plenty of fun. But also don't forget about Harris Cherokee Resort in Cherokee, North Carolina. That's the original, and it's still great, too, with over 1,000 rooms. It's less than 3 hours from Atlanta, and it's everything you'd expect from a world-class resort. 3,500 games, World Series of Poker events, spa, golf, concerts, and plenty of dining options. No matter your play, Harris Cherokee Casinos has you covered. So do this. Go to Caesars.com/Harris Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. Check that out. Harrah's Cherokee Casinos bringing the spring practice update to us here on DawgNation Daily. All right, before we're done, let me also kind of shift gears on a dime and go to something else that happened last night, because I did not want to finish the show without bringing this to your attention. McDonald's All-American game last night, and of course, right there at the center of that was the 5-star UGA commit, Anthony Edwards. This is a really fun basketball prospect for UGA, and one of the cool things about Edwards right now is, first of all, in addition to really fantastic highlights, he's got a magnetic personality, and he's also thinking big things for the future of Georgia basketball. Even if his piece of that is only 1 year long, he thinks next year could be a lot of fun for UGA fans. So I wanted you to hear this. Here is Anthony Edwards with our Mike Griffith.
I'm just going up there, freshman on campus. I'm just trying to produce, man. I'm just trying to make my state happy. That's all I'm trying to do.
Is it fair for us to think that with you and these 4 top 100 guys that Georgia's going to be in the NCAA tournament next year? Is that the plan?
I will hope you guys think that.
I mean, come on now. I love that. I love that from Anthony Edwards. I hope you think we're going to be in the NCAA tournament next year. That's, to me, really fun stuff. And when you watch, listen, I don't know how good Georgia can be next year. I think actually making the tournament, even with talented players like that, it's going to be a pretty significant challenge. But you see the tournament this year, the ratings are through the roof because of the impact that Zion Williamson's had, not just on Duke, but on the sport in general. I think on a very localized, smaller level, I think Anthony Edwards, because of the highlights, because of the personality, could do that for Georgia basketball as well, and that would not be a bad thing. All right, let's get ready to wrap up here on today's program. Obviously, around here, we are Gator haters. We talk about that all the time, and we want to make sure we give you our update. Gator hater updater, here's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. We have now reached 880 days. That's how long it's been since Georgia has beaten, I should say Florida's beaten Georgia. That's really good news here on DawgNation Daily. By the way, I mentioned the Harrah's Cherokee Casinos spring practice update. Make sure you check out all of this at DawgNation.com. From Chip Towers, from Mike Griffith, everybody else part of the DawgNation gang. This is a fun time of year. Heading towards G-Day on April 20th and everything else. This is a Georgia program that I think has a chance to be really good. The 2019 season can be special. But the work to make all that happen is taking place right now, and DawgNation, I believe, has unprecedented coverage for all of that. So check that out at DawgNation.com. I will look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily. And on video, I was trying to check. I'm not aware of this. I should have mentioned this in the regular show. Are the Diamond Dogs playing tonight against Kentucky? That's tonight. I should have mentioned that during the regular show. So what they've started doing over the last couple of years used to be that the top SEC series were always like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, unless you were playing a million miles away, and then you might play the Saturday doubleheader. But the SEC network the last couple of years has started doing a Thursday night game. So it's a chance. It's almost like, I mean, I'd say it's a fairly marquee television product to be on there at night. I was going to mention that. You should probably have Emerson Hancock's got to be pitching tonight probably, right? Yeah. So you want to watch this guy for Georgia go on the road at Kentucky. I don't think Kentucky's quite as good maybe this year as they were a year ago. I don't 100% know, but I don't think that's the case. But nonetheless, Diamond Dogs have been fun to watch this year. Did lose this past couple nights ago to Georgia Tech, but honestly, the middle of the week stuff is nowhere near as important, even for the in-state rival Tech. The middle of the week stuff is not as important as what happens on the weekends. That's where Georgia's going to prove its mettle. And on the road at Lexington against the Wildcats tonight, Georgia has a chance to do that. So if you are interested, SEC Network for that, although I do know that many of you also be watching the NCAA tournament, which is certainly understandable as well. However, with all that said, let's transition here and let's welcome in you to the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We get kind of heated up on the show today, especially when we're talking about recruiting rumors and soap opera twists and turns and everything else. So when we get heated up, it's important to cool down, and R.S. Andrews gives us a chance to do that. But not just us, they can give you that same chance to cool down as well. Because let's face it, when you go to flick that air conditioning switch on for the first time this year, or if you've already done it, there's that little bit of nervous anxiety of, is this thing going to work? Is it going to cool my house down? Listen, R.S. Andrews takes all the worry away from that for you, because they will give your system a total check over and make sure it's ready to run and make sure it's ready to hum the way that it needs to and cool down your house. And it's not just that system. It's your heater, it's plumbing stuff, it's electrical stuff, all the stuff that's kind of behind the walls on the house. R.S. Andrews, they know all about that kind of stuff, which I'm glad somebody does, because I don't know the first thing about any of it. So please check them out, rsandrews.com, rsandrews.com. They will help you out, and they help us out by providing the R.S. Andrews cool down here on the program today. Let me pull up the comments, and we will get rocking and rolling on that. A few things to do here. First of all, on the Facebook side of things, a lot of times I have the comments pulled up during the show. Today I had like 9,000 browsers up, and so I did not ever get that going. But we can get them going right now and get a lot of your comments. By the way, how much did you love what Anthony Edwards said a moment ago as well? I thought that was really fun. Hayes Calloway says, if we beat Alabama in the SEC game, do we meet in the playoffs? Hayes, I do believe, and this isn't conspiratorial, I think this is partially earned over a decade's worth of good work, but you say, hey, if Georgia beats Alabama, is there a chance they'll have to play them again? As of now, I'm of the belief there's a much better chance that Georgia could rematch with Alabama after a Georgia victory, more so than Alabama would have to rematch with Georgia after a Crimson Tide victory. What I'm saying is I still think when it comes to that second team in, and presumably the non-SEC champion would be the second team in, as it stands right now, I think Alabama is still going to get that benefit of the doubt more so than Georgia is. It's just become Alabama's been in every playoff. They've kind of earned that level of cachet. I am a pro wrestling fan. You've heard it said to be the man, you've got to beat the man. Ric Flair made that famous. There's also kind of like the old champion's advantage rule of wrestling where the wrestler can't lose his title on a count out or disqualification. There's a little bit of a champion's advantage in college football too. Until Alabama is knocked out of the playoff, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt of a team like Georgia that's only been in the playoffs once of the last 5 years. That's one of the things that Kirby Smart's working to change, to grow Georgia to the stature where it gets that same extra look that Clemson might get, that extra look that Alabama might get. And as I've said, this year, assuming that Georgia's as good as I think they can be, I believe that one of the major storylines is going to be that battle to be the number one seed. Now, Clemson, the defending champion, starts off at number one almost for sure. Over the course of the year, is there something that Georgia can do, assuming that Clemson doesn't lose, assuming that Clemson just kind of rides through undefeated, is there something that Georgia can do to get that number one seed status away from Clemson? Because assuming that Clemson's not the number 4 seed, the highest seeded team is going to get a chance to play the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. And when you think about being in New Orleans for the national championship game, to think that Georgia's we do this a lot with college basketball teams too, but to think that Georgia's path to a national championship could be Atlanta for the SEC championship, Atlanta for the Peach Bowl, New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl, that is just a much, much easier task than going out to Arizona for the other semifinal game, which is, I believe, what the other semifinal game is. I mean, I remember being in Pasadena in that Georgia locker room after the Rose Bowl, and it's euphoria, right? I mean, I was on the verge of tears. I just seen the greatest sporting event that I had ever seen. I mean, I get chills even now thinking about it. The person who was not mentally fazed by any of this at all was Kirby Smart. It was amazing to see Smart in action after that game, and it's an open locker room situation, so you see a little more unfettered stuff from him in that moment than you will in other moments. He was on a mission to get his team out of Pasadena onto a plane back to Atlanta because he knew the game against Alabama, or we didn't know it was Alabama at the time, but he knew the national championship game was only going to be 1 week away. Now, this year you got more distance in between the championship game, which makes it the travel part of this potential a little easier. But still, if you get a chance to play in Atlanta, that's where you want to play. So to take a long answer to Hayes' question, whether it be Alabama, Clemson, whomever else, that battle to be that top seed, to earn that respect this year, I think it certainly helps in the process of winning a national championship. I do.
I would say an example of where Georgia could jump Clemson is, so they beat Notre Dame early and they beat them. I don't expect a blowout, but I think a convincing win would maybe propel them over Clemson early on. And then I think Georgia's going to have to go undefeated and beat either a one-loss or undefeated Alabama team in the SEC championship game to really lock that in there. Because I think the ACC is still going to be pretty weak this year.
Yeah.
And I do think if Georgia's unbeaten with highly rated wins over Notre Dame, sweeping through the SEC again, and beating a still top 3 Alabama team, I think that should be enough to put them over a Clemson team that, looking at it from today's point of view, other than the Texas A&M game, which A&M could end the season. I mean, I know we're both pretty high on Texas A&M, but it's very, it's not out of the realm of possibility to see them finish the season with 4 or 5 losses either. So they may not have a really all that impressive.
Yeah, they have a huge swing schedule.
Right, exactly.
They have a very
they're at
swingy
LSU,
schedule. Yeah.
At Georgia, home for Alabama, at Clemson. I mean, that's it's not out of the realm of possibility at all. Those are 4 losses right there.
I want to get James Bryant's comment, Matt Rugavina's comment, because they're both on the same topic. But it's funny you mentioned that about Notre Dame, because I was referencing that ESPN piece earlier where it mentions Georgia's most important game or game you got circled being Notre Dame. One of the things that the writer said was, hey, this could be a carbon copy of what happened in 2017 when it was a nail-biter down to the wire. I'm going to tell y'all, I think I may have told this story before. I left that press box because it's like being in the Sistine Chapel. It's like the most quietest, most reverent thing in the world, that Notre Dame press box. It was eerily quiet, so much so that if somebody talked on the other side of the press box, you could hear what they were saying. That's too quiet for me, completely enclosed in the glass. You couldn't hear the fans. But Notre Dame's the nicest stadium in the world, so they have a patio on the left side of the press box. So for the fourth quarter, I go out there and stand outdoors away from the rest of the media because I was just so nervous. That game was almost like a baseball game in that every single play was magnified more so than normal. Every single stop, every single yard gained. It was a very low-scoring game. It was a nerve-wracking game, even down to the wire. The Blankenship field goal, the Davin Bellamy sack, all the stuff that happened in that game. That was just a game in which every play seemed larger than life because there were so few big plays kind of in the game. A lot of defense played in that game. And what the writer for ESPN said is, hey, this 2019 rematch could be a carbon copy of the great thrilling game we saw in 2017. It was a thrilling game. It's still a fun rewatch on YouTube. You can find the NBC telecast there on YouTube. However, I do find myself thinking, and I hope I don't regret saying this, if Georgia wins close versus Notre Dame, I'm going to be a little disappointed. I think for the reason that Connor just said, that you got to find opportunities to overtake Clemson. Clemson, even if the ACC is weak, now listen, I love kicking around the ACC. Even if the ACC is weak, you don't have a lot of room to say, and that makes Clemson weak, because Clemson blew out Alabama. Now, Clemson also blew out Notre Dame as well, but it's really the Alabama blowout. That all of a sudden now you may kick around the ACC and you may say the Clemson schedule is weak as water because of the preponderance of ACC teams on that schedule. But Clemson, for the most part, is bulletproof against that criticism because they blew out Alabama in last year's playoff. And you say, well, different teams, different seasons. Honestly, that's not where the human brain works. The human brain does not disqualify information like that the way you think it does. It does factor into the perception, and human beings are the ones that do the human polls and do the playoff committee and all that kind of stuff. So Clemson benefits from what it did a year ago. Georgia's got to find a way to say, well, this year's narrative is different. And I think Connor's right. 17, 21-point victory against Notre Dame, even if it's in your own home stadium, still you'll get credit for an impressive showing there. I think that's really important. Now, Matt Rukavina in the Facebook comment section a moment ago said he's got some family who are Notre Dame grads. They're looking for revenge. And I think they probably will be coming down here looking for that proof. It's even been said on the Notre Dame side of things that this is kind of a show-me, prove-it game for Notre Dame as well because, let's face it, much the same way that last year's narrative lingers for Clemson for the positive, when it comes to Notre Dame, last year's narrative lingers for the negative. Notre Dame heard, well, this is just 2012 all over again after it got blown out by Clemson in the national semifinal game this past year. They want to prove that they're capable of going to bat with one of these elite talent type teams, and Georgia from a talent perspective is probably right there alongside anybody, second or third most talented team in the entire country, arguably the number one most talented team in the entire country from a composite standpoint. Notre Dame does want to prove they can go head-to-head with a team like this. So I think that Matt is right about this, that that Notre Dame is going to kind of come into Athens with a bit of a chip on its shoulder. This will be a local story, but it'll be worth following. By local, I mean from South Bend in that area. There'll probably be a lot of talk within their own message board communities and local media about Notre Dame fans trying to come to Athens the way that Georgia fans descended upon Chicago and South Bend. That'll probably end up being kind of a big deal. I don't think you're going to see nearly as much gold and blue in Athens, though, because I just don't think that many Georgia fans, I'm talking about large numbers. I don't think large numbers of Georgia fans are going to want to sell their tickets. James Bryant also mentioned, go ahead and just beat Notre Dame bad for fun. And I think it would be fun, but for the reasons that I just mentioned, this is going to be one of those years where, and I hate to compare it to politics, but it's almost going to be like a political thing where, like, I feel like the Georgia fans are going to need to make the argument for themselves in comparison, assuming that Georgia really is good and really is, in the playoff conversation. Georgia's going to have to argue for itself in comparison to Clemson or a team like that because of how high the stakes are to play the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. Justin Dowell says we should dominate Notre Dame, especially being at home, and I think that's a fair point, Justin. My assumption is that Georgia will be a big favorite based on BetOnline's early look ahead. They are a pretty big favorite, like 11.5-point favorite, according to BetOnline. Here's the only thing I'll caution about that. We saw last year Georgia be a true playoff caliber team in November, but not really that team in September or October. Statistically speaking, Georgia wasn't that bad, but just to my eyes, and I hate doing eye test stuff, but to my eyes, Georgia didn't look like a playoff team to me as much early in the year as it did late in the year when it's laying waste to Florida, laying waste to Kentucky on the road, which is still a better win than some people want to give Georgia credit for, and then what it does to Auburn and Georgia Tech and playing a thrilling game against Alabama. Georgia had the look of a playoff team. Now, if you remember in comment sections like this, we went into last year kind of knowing that would be true, that Georgia would grow into this over time and Georgia would use some of those 2018 signees to fill in some of the gaps that it had on its roster. But it's difficult for me to say with 100% confidence, yes, Georgia's going to absolutely blaze the trail right over Notre Dame in Week 4, given the fact that this team in Week 4 a year ago, I wouldn't say was nearly as dominant as it turned out to be. I have a sense that this season is going to be different. I think it should be, given the overall talent level on the roster, but you're still looking for that number 2 running back. You're still looking for that number 1, 2, and 3 wide receiver. You're still looking to establish the pass rush and the havoc-wreaking defense that Kirby Smart's talked about. So there are enough questions for me to at least conjure some doubt about whether that Georgia's going to be able to truly be as dominant as fans we need them to be come Week 4, Connor Riley.
I thought you and Mike Johnson touched on this really well on the show, and it was a topic on the forum that on the DawgNation forum today that really caught my eye. How good is Georgia going to be this year? Yeah. I think Georgia is good enough to win a national championship this year, but I kind of think if there's going to be a year for it to happen, it has to be this year. Mm-hmm. Given that, I think the defense will be even better next year than it will be this year just because it is still relatively young, especially in some key areas. But you look at the potential losses Georgia's going to have on offense going into 2020. DeAndre Swift's probably gone. Andrew Thomas is probably gone. You're probably replacing Isaiah Wilson. There's a good chance Jake Fromm could leave. You could have to replace both Solomon Kinley and Ben Cleveland. That's a lot to replace on offense. And I do think Georgia has the talent to do it in 2019, but I do think there is going to be maybe a little bit of pressure on Kirby coming from himself, because what's going to happen, and I can already see it playing out, is let's say, Georgia has the same season it does in 2018 where it loses to Alabama. I think Mike's point about how Kirby's going to start getting that Jim Harbaugh comparison from the national media, that's going to start coming in droves. It's going to be, he's a good coach, but how good is he, to the point where, the Stu Mandelas of the world, moronically, are going to leave him off their top 25 coaching list.
So I will just be very honest with you. I hope, I pray that we're not having to do these kinds of shows a year from now, because if it is a carbon copy of previous seasons in 2019, there will be some restlessness on the part of Georgia fans. But I feel like it'll be my duty to say, I don't think there's a reason to panic. I think that the process that Georgia's putting in place is the process. The truth is, I still think Jim Harbaugh is going to have some success at Michigan.
He's won 10 games each of the last 2 years. He's not Jim McElwain.
Yeah, his issue is similar to what Georgia's issue appears to be. It's tough getting over that Ohio State hump, and Georgia's obviously dealing with that when it comes to Alabama. But what Georgia is doing is the right thing to do to win a championship. I do believe, and this isn't an excuse making, I do believe it is harder to win one now because of how concentrated the resources are in just a couple of different spots. I think winning a championship now is harder than it's been before. But I also think there's some evidence that you can point to that that Kirby Smart is on a trajectory that's not the same as some of these other coaches that you might want to kick around. For instance, and I think it was Connor's one that gave us the stat. In the last 4 years, there have only been 3 programs that have won a playoff game. Georgia's one of those. Obviously, Clemson, Alabama won playoff games, but there's only been 5 years of college football playoff history. In 4 of those years, all the playoff wins were done by 3 teams. Clemson, Alabama for the most part. Georgia beat Oklahoma. That's a real win that ought to count in Kirby Smart's count on his resume, and ought to make a Georgia fan feel comfortable about Smart, even if the nuclear option happens and Georgia doesn't win the championship this year. I think you do need to keep some perspective, but the fact that you've got evidence that this is different from Georgia's past and different from other storylines involving other college programs. Kirby did go to major bowls 2 years in a row, and I hate having to rattle off these seemingly consolation prize, bullet point resume items. But being in the Sugar Bowl the year after having been in the Rose Bowl is something that Georgia hasn't done since the early 80s and the Dooley era. That's something that makes Kirby, in this case, different from Mark Richt. A number 1 recruiting class. How many programs in the last 10 years have had a number 1 recruiting class? I guess it's just 2, right?
Alabama and Georgia.
Yeah. So there are lots of examples of, Georgia hasn't done all it wants to do, but it's done plenty that no one else has done. So I hope to goodness I'm not having to be the good soldier, happy-go-lucky guy in the face of what is mounting criticism, because y'all all know that's what's going to happen if 2019 doesn't go the way that it's supposed to go. But I do believe now that the evidence will be there then to support. This just may take a little longer than you wanted it to, but I am not like Connor, and I'm not like anyone who would say, hey, it's got to be now or it may not be ever.
I'm not saying it's never.
I know. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. I just, I think 2019 is a year really well set up. I think Alabama's losing a lot on defense. Clemson isn't going to be the same defensive team now. Obviously, they both have Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa. But I think, the defensive issues, I think Georgia's going to have a better defense than both of those programs this year, and I think that's why they're better positioned maybe this year than any other year going forward.
Yeah, I think the way that I want to say this is this. I believe there's a temptation to say, if not now, when? And there's a lot of reasons why you might say that, if not now, when? For what Georgia has, opportunities that other programs present, maybe certain vulnerabilities they may have. I think there's a temptation to say, in year 4 for Kirby, if not now, when, especially given the recent track record of coaches who have won championships. Ultimately, I believe if we need to have that conversation, the temptation is going to be wrong. I just do, because I see things happening at Georgia now that have not happened, and even if it takes a little longer, my confidence in it eventually happening really hasn't wavered whatsoever. Let me pull up the YouTube comments, and I apologize for not doing YouTube
One other,
yet.
so you mentioned Anthony Edwards. Watched him a little bit last night. The All-Star Game's not really sort of his, because there are so many guys competing for, minutes and time to shine. I think last night he was sort of content to just, take a step back a little bit, not really try and take over the game. However, I think the expectation should be with him coming in, if he's as good as everyone thinks he is, with Hammonds coming back, with Claxton most likely coming back, I think an NCAA tournament berth should be an expectation for Georgia next year. I think Auburn's certainly going to take a step back with Jared Harper and Bryce Brown leaving. Ole Miss is probably going to take a step back. They have a couple seniors on their team. Mississippi State's going to take a step back. I think Georgia can at least get to that middle tier of the SEC. And, the SEC, with how strong it is now, that's good enough to get you into the NCAA tournament.
So that's fine. I think that's probably a pretty good opinion. I guess my thing is, I didn't watch the McDonald's game last night, but I did see a photo, and we have it at DawgNation, of Edwards and his arms like way above the rim. To see that photo, to see Edwards talk, that's kind of all I need to know right now. Because ultimately, making the tournament, not making the tournament, making a run in the tournament would be great. But if you're teetering on the brink of do you make the tournament or not, what's more interesting to me than that personally is basketball something that I can talk about here on DawgNation Daily? Because I'll be very, very candid for a moment. It would be a dream come true for me to be able to add basketball talk into what we typically do January, February, March. A lot of recruiting, a little bit of aftermath from the football season, fun basketball game on a Wednesday night versus, whomever at Stegman Coliseum. As it stands right now, most of our audience just doesn't want that. And I'm not here to have should we talk about basketball talk or not. I'm not trying to stir that up. What I'm saying is I have to play the hits. I have to pay attention to the numbers. I have to sort of satisfy the masses. I just kind of do. That's the way that it goes. But I would love for a charismatic figure like Edwards. And watching his interview with Mike Griffith, and you should check it out on the DawgNation video channels. I know for sure it's on the YouTube page. It's probably on others. YouTube's probably the best place to watch it. Go watch that video. This is a guy who's got a little something about him. And, it's not often that, even for sometimes really good basketball players, a lot of these guys are kind of shy. I don't come across thinking that Edwards is really a shy guy. I think he's going to have a kind of a nice personality. He's going to play the right kind of basketball to get folks excited. Every year there are top prospects, but they don't all, kind of come the same way. A guy that's above the rim, which is, I think, what Edwards is going to be, at least based on some of the brief stuff I've seen from him. That's going to be a really interesting deal. I made the comparison to Zion Williamson during the show. The same way that Zion has made college basketball nationally relevant in a way that it just has not been in a long time. There's more just general chatter about college basketball this year than you have seen in forever. I think if the localized version of that could happen here in the state of Georgia, even if they don't make the tournament or they make the tournament, don't win a game once they get there, then there is no doubt that Anthony Edwards will have left Georgia better than he found it.
I think Georgia has to make the tournament for all that to happen.
Do you really think so?
Yep. I think people want to see a winner. I covered Georgia for 3 years in college, and I've followed the team closely as I've moved here in Atlanta and done more stuff with SC Country and DawgNation. I certainly see your point about playing an exciting brand of basketball, but Georgia just needs to win. They need to win. They need to get in the NCAA tournament. They need to do it consistently. And will it ever be a thing where every day we're talking about Georgia basketball? Maybe, but that's not 3-4 years down the line.
I guess the only thing I'll say different than that is to me that college basketball's regular season is the sport that seems more disconnected from its postseason than any other, because the regular season happens on campus, the postseason all happens on neutral sites. I mean, this past year, based on the numbers, Georgia was sold out every single game. I have to admit, I didn't hear a lot of people, just as I was walking the streets and just kind of general chatter, I didn't hear that many people talking about Georgia basketball. So I think there's a way to be regular season relevant, even if you don't get to the postseason, to make Stegman Coliseum kind of feel like the place to be, or have me interacting with a lot of Georgia fans just in my regular life, have people say, boy, did you see what Georgia did last night? Did you see what Anthony Edwards did last night? Obviously, I'd love to see the tournament success come. I've seen lots of examples with freshmen where that kind of hasn't happened, but I'd even settle for a little less than that. I would have to say. Let me get a few more comments here. Brian Kephart on this topic says this is an issue where one tourney appearance isn't enough. It needs to be 3 or 4 years in a row, kind of do a deal to fulfill those wants. And Brian, I understand where you're coming from on that. I guess what I'm saying is that whatever happens in the next season, I guess you'll call it the 2018-19 season, whatever happens in that season, it's going to be a foundation anyway, because multiple NCAA tournament appearances are going to be done by players we haven't even heard about yet because of just how kind of quick this goes. The best players, going to be, at least by the rules right now, are going to be one and done type guys. So one way or another, whether Georgia goes to the Final Four or doesn't make the tournament, it's going to be a foundational baseline year as it is, because it's the attention that Georgia gets from this class for future recruits that's going to matter more than anything else anyway. Let me get Cliff Payne on the subject of football here for a moment, who says that Kirby Smart was devastated when Devon Wilson blew out his leg in spring practice last year. It's because he knew Devon was perfect at the star position, one of the most important positions on the field. Cliff, I think you're right about that. I thought it was a rare moment of candor from Kirby last year when he did talk as openly as he did about Wilson's opportunity to make a contribution had he not gotten hurt. And I think that Kirby was hoping that he could return during the year. Ultimately, that didn't really happen, I guess, until the Sugar Bowl. But when we saw him play, we saw him look good. And I think he, for the most part, got positive reviews there for that day. So I think that Wilson's a big part of this. And I guess tomorrow we'll play this audio. I've been trying to get to it all week long, just haven't gotten to it yet. I thought that Kirby also had some interesting things to say about his secondary when he spoke earlier this week. He used the word personality to describe that group. That last year, because they did have so many very young guys. Now, DeAndre Baker, the same way I've called Roquan Smith an eraser, DeAndre Baker was kind of an eraser for the secondary a year ago. It's a lot easier for the secondary when half the field is well taken care of. But Kirby talked about, other than DeAndre Baker, You got a lot of very young guys learning how to play, and the insinuation is that even impacts the way that the front seven can go after quarterbacks and things like that when you're worried about your secondary. And Georgia had a lot of young secondary guys a year ago. But the word he used this year was personality. It seems like he's kind of happy with the personality of his secondary right now. I took that to mean that as it stands right now, even minus DeAndre Baker and minus Mel Tucker, who's done some good work as a coach with that group, I took this to mean in the early stages of spring practice, and Connor, I'll let you weigh in on this, that Kirby Smart's actually fairly confident in his secondary right now.
I think Kirby Smart really – he didn't say a whole lot about his safeties, and I'd like to maybe, have asked him go a little bit further beyond. He did mention the top three guys, and I think it's clear top three of J.R. Reed, Richard LeCount, and Otis Reese. But I think he feels really, really good about his cornerbacks this year. It is still a young room, yes. But, I'm going to list off 5 guys here. Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, Devad Wilson, DJ Daniel, who he really seemed to like when he spoke about him. Even Tyreek Stevenson. Those are, 5 young guys who Kirby seemed to feel pretty confident in. And I think that says a lot about where this team's strength is going to be in 2019, excuse me.
Funny comment from James Bryan on Facebook who says, geez, this next season is a turning point for football and for basketball both. Ooh, the drama.
I do think that's true, though. Football maybe a little bit less so. I just think there's, from my own personal view, there's pressure to win this year just because I think this would be a really great year to do it. Basketball, Texas A&M's probably going to go hire Buzz Williams, who's in a Sweet 16, has done great things at Virginia Tech. Arkansas is probably going to go hire Kelvin Sampson, who just turned around Houston. The SEC is only going to continue to get better at basketball. And I think, if Green can show next year that, hey, I'm a place where if you're a one-and-done guy, you want to come in and lead your own team, you can come here, you can do that. We'll get you to a tournament. We'll get you some of that exposure, maybe not the Zion level, but this is a place where you can come, show off your talents, go to the NBA, be a number 1 overall pick, which I think Edwards has the possibility of becoming. And I think if he's able to do and show all that next year, I think that bodes very well for Georgia in the years to come.
I will get back to football, but let me make just one more quick comment about all of this, and then I want to get Wayne Kirkland's comment on Jake Fromm on the Facebook side of things. I think there's a huge difference in being in Athens and being in the state of Georgia. If you go around the state, 99% of the time, the conversation about UGA is about football. And, it's about even what's happening at spring practice more so than anything else happening on campus during the spring. Basketball season is the same way. The aftermath of the football season is a much bigger deal than the epicenter of the basketball season. That's just the case. But when you are in Athens, things can feel a little different. And I've been in Athens. I don't live in Athens. I live here in the Atlanta area. But I've been in Athens a few times over the last few days. I talked to a lot of people who live in Athens. And there's kind of an interesting buzz around the campus right now. I think baseball is the perfect example of this. The Georgia baseball team is, I know they're dealing with some injuries and some things like that, but they are really good. Really good. And the LSU series this past weekend was thrilling. People in Athens are talking about this, and there's some excitement about beyond just the football program. I think basketball is the same way. In Athens, the conversation probably happens and exists around basketball a lot more because I think for the most part, especially the Wednesday games, for the most part, the crowd is filled with people who live in Athens as opposed to the football games, which are filled from people all over the world, certainly all over the state of Georgia. So the point here is, if basketball could get good to go along with what the baseball team's doing right now, the campus would actually be kind of fun to have, like multiple sports being good at one point in time. And I think that there's a hunger in the city to kind of see all the programs do well, whereas for the most part, DawgNation, the larger body, is for the most part still only thinking about football. Mm-hmm. Wayne Kirkland on the subject of Fromm. He says, can Fromm air it out if asked to? Only time I've seen him struggle is when we are forced to use the air attack. Otherwise, a great quarterback. That's interesting from Wayne Kirkland. I'll add to this. I saw some internet chatter again, last night. One more person kind of coming out there. And it wasn't a big name guy or anything, but one more person kind of putting his name out there. Jake Fromm's going to be a top 5 pick or, something along the lines with that. High first-round draft pick. That people are going to like Jake Fromm. And first of all, I love Fromm, so I love seeing him touted as a elite draft pick. I don't cherish the idea of him not being on Georgia's roster in 2020, but I like seeing that. But I do think, for what Wayne's saying, this is an interesting year for Fromm to show he can take that next step with his game. I think that 2018 was a big improvement for him over 2017. We've already seen progression from him, But that last bit of progression is probably going to be even more difficult, more airing it out, more athleticism in the pocket. I do think it's going to be interesting to see what Fromm's able to do in that regard. You know, the thing that hangs as a dark cloud for me over not Fromm in particular, but the Georgia team in general, was just how baffled Georgia seemed to be by what Dave Aranda was doing in Baton Rouge that day. We have done that now 9 million times. I know that's well-traveled ground for us as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool-down. But how does Georgia in 2019 handle whatever pre-snap stuff Aranda was showing, or those talented LSU defensive backs, Greedy Williams, you know, mainly speaking here, Grant Delpit the safety, and, you know, what they want to do to Georgia's pass-catching targets? How does Georgia counterbalance that version of that in 2019? Fromm's a big part of that story, and there is, for me, even though I'm the biggest Fromm homer in the world, there is a little bit of a wait and see for me of what does the next step for Jake truly look like?
I will say, I just want to put this out there because people are talking about it, and, you know, they mentioned the stat. I think Georgia's 0-3 when Fromm's asked to throw it 35-plus times.
Misleading stat.
Georgia didn't lose to LSU because of Jake Fromm. He was a part of the reason they lost because he didn't play particularly well that day. He's not the biggest reason Georgia lost that. Georgia lost that day because they gave up 275 rushing yards to an LSU team that didn't have an NFL running back or an NFL quarterback on their team. You know, they lost to Texas because they just chose to not show up for the first quarter of that game. Right. Fromm, yes, he does have some questions to answer. I don't know if in the Jim Chaney, I don't believe Jim Chaney's offense always lent itself to doing what Fromm does best. Like, could you imagine what Fromm would do in an up-tempo system like a Mike Leach Washington State system where he's asked to just, hey, you know, we're not going to put chains on you and force you to go here, here, and here. We're just going to let you, you know, sit up there, go hurry up, get to the line, call out what you see, and just let it rip. I do think, you know, and, you know, the risk of that is tiring out, is if things don't go well, you put your defense back out there and you put your defense in jeopardy. But I do think, you know, there is some credence to maybe wanting to see Fromm go a little bit quicker and a little bit, you know, let him. Yeah. Because he's a very smart player, and, you know, just about everyone has said that and praised his pre-snap ability. Let him sort of do that and, you know, sort of take both, you know, Georgia's own coaching staff and the opposing defensive coaching staff out of it.
So I want to get Mark Cochran's comment on this. Let me also respond to I think the stat was out there of, hey, Georgia's 0-3 when they've thrown it, you know, 35 times or more. Honestly, that's going to be more true than not for a lot of teams. You know, and now I know in college football now there's a million teams throwing the ball all the time, so everybody throws it more than 35 times. But take the NFL, for instance. The counterbalance to this is, you may have heard it said in NFL circles before that NFL teams that rush 40 or more times win 80% of the time. That makes it sound like, hey, running teams win. The real truth is that winning teams run. That may be a stat that you can say is true, but it's not a very predictive stat. Otherwise, you just rush the ball the first 40 times of the game, and you'd march on to victory. But that's not the way that the NFL works. I think college football is the same way. Even the pass-happy age we're in now, this is not so much that running teams win as it is that winning teams run. And so, therefore, when Georgia's throwing the ball more, that's a game that may have been on the way to losing as it was. But in opportunities where Georgia needs to throw the ball, it does need to be better, which leads you to what Mark Cochran says is, and this is interesting, he says the thing is, if we get behind, can we make those big plays at will to get us back in the game? Jake Fromm is the key to that. I would agree, although I think the premise, at least in my mind, is slightly different. Let me say this and see if y'all agree. At the end of the first half, Georgia, to me, always looks good. So if they were, you know, in a true 2-minute situation trying to come back late in the game, my assumption is they're going to be okay against most teams because when they do go hurry up, they've got some talent to do that. I think there are some reasons why they don't want to do that, you know, for the entirety of a game. And those are probably really good reasons, especially, you know, big offensive linemen, things along those lines. But when they do that, I think they are good. The one thing I'd love to see from Fromm is not so much, hey, can you help Georgia out when it's in a close game? But can you add some elements to the passing game that preserve the thing that I believe that Georgia's been the best at? And this is the most underrated aspect of Georgia under Kirby Smart, but it should not be overlooked. The thing that Georgia's been the best at is just avoiding close games altogether. Once you get into a close game, anything can kind of happen. And I know for some Georgia fans, they think, well, the breaks always seem to break one direction. That's not true. I mean, as much as you want to think about the 2 Alabama games, you got to think about the Rose Bowl and everything else. In these close games down to the wire, anything can happen. But the best teams, Alabama's proven this, Clemson's proven this, the best teams are the best teams because they don't play very many close games. So, you know, Georgia has dominated the SEC East, but now the East is getting a little bit better. the recipe that Georgia has used to dominate the division before, all of a sudden now maybe you need the extra wrinkle of the passing game to make sure you preserve those 2 touchdown victories, that safe margin of victory. Can you do that against SEC West competition, Notre Dame included? That's one of the things I'd love to see from Georgia. Add that extra dimension to the passing game so you don't have to play any close games. I think that Georgia's been really good about that. And, doing some good work in hostile territory is also probably a question worth answering there, too.
We talk about how great of a sports day it is today.
It's really fun. Really fun.
Opening day,
yeah.
March Madness tonight, all great games. I like Virginia. I like Purdue over Tennessee. I like Gonzaga. I like Texas Tech. Those are your 4 winners for tonight if you want to go make some money tonight. You got opening day. Sun is shining. Georgia has football practice.
Wow.
It's just unfortunately not open to the media.
Yeah.
And on March 28th, a really great day. Anniversary of Christian Laettner's iconic shot to beat Kentucky in the Elite Eight.
Wow.
27 years ago. 29 years ago today, Michael Jordan scored his all-time career high 69 points. March 28th, a pretty great day on the calendar.
Good times. So I hope you all enjoy the sporting calendar here today. Really appreciate your comments as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for that. Got some fun stuff coming on the DawgNation video channels here and there, too, including a DN90 a little later on today as well. Chip Towers got his show coming up today, too, right? A little Towers Take coming up today. So Chip will have some thoughts on spring practice and everything else. It's great to have you with us on the program. Thanks to R.S. Andrews for making it all possible. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They do good stuff, and they'll do it for you. So no surprises, no bad news with the price or bad news with work that you didn't know needed to be done that does get done. None of that kind of stuff. No, it's simple, and it's easy, and it is effective. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical, rsandrews.com. Check them out on the web and sign them up to do what you need around the house. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Of course, we'll have a fun afternoon tomorrow, or I shouldn't say afternoon, although it almost stretches into the afternoon of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down here. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you then.